Hello, 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 everyone. Hello. All right. I apologize for being a little late today. I was on a call. And also, as you could tell, I'm not in my normal location. So being on a mobile setup is not the same as being at my regular, desk in my office when I have everything all set up. So it always takes me a little bit to kind of get everything. Plus, it's the Friday. I'm in the US right now, so it's the Friday after Thanksgiving. A little bit I have turkey drowsiness. Even so, I have to admit, I did have some leftovers for breakfast this morning. I couldn't resist. I love Thanksgiving. It is my favorite, favorite, favorite holiday of the entire year, mainly because I love food and I love to cook. So yes, so yesterday was my day of just spending the day with my family, cooking and enjoying as much as possible. Wherever you are, I hope you had a beautiful day of thanks. And I hope that you are enjoying whatever is coming and that this next holiday season is going to be smooth and fun. And yeah, smooth ease. That's it. That's what we're looking for. I also wanted to let everybody know really quick that there are still some Green Friday gifts available. As you know, I offer these Green Friday gifts instead of doing a Black Friday offer. I have not done a Black Friday offer in over 4 years. This is my third year doing, well, in over 3 years, excuse me. This is my fourth year doing a Green Friday gift, and I love doing them. I offer these plant music, well, not I, we, Spider Plant, and I offer these plant music healing sessions as a way to kind of just create a different connection to the holiday season that's based on healing, that's based on growth. We know that it can be a really stressful period for so many people going into family dynamics, end of year stresses, lots of judgment, lots of other types of things. And so that's why I want to offer these Green Friday gifts, because I want to give you an opportunity to really get some much needed healing in this period. Now, if your holiday season is super smooth, rock on. This then will enhance that. So don't think that it just has to be if things are going challenging, but because the working with spider plant can often enhance things that are going well or help give us directions for what is the next level of development as well. I should put that into my information about the plant music healing sessions. They're not just if something is going wrong, they can be a really amazing enhancer when things are going well or to help you see what's going next. Anyway, but that's not what we're here for. We're here today to talk about a series of plant consciousness, plants, connections, reconnection to nature, all that good stuff that we talk about. So I'm excited. I actually have an article that I want to go through. I don't always go through articles, but I saw this article and just the title. I actually haven't read the whole article. As you know, I like to read these things with you. And I have an article, and then I found this really fascinating, I don't even know exactly what it is. It might be it's kind of a paper, it's more of an essay, but and yeah, I felt like as we're going into the end of the year, we needed to kind of shift the focus a little bit. We've been very technical. We've gone through a lot of the conversations around plant consciousness and their benefits for the perspective of really recognizing plants. Here I want to flip it to understanding how your vegetality or your plantness and how different forms of connections can really help us as a whole of society. So beyond just some of, I don't even know how to explain this. In my head, it's all very clear, but you know how it is. My plantness sometimes makes it really difficult to share something. So you know what I'm going to do? I'm just going to get straight into the first article because I think that that will make everything much more clear. So let me share my screen. Remember, I am on my computer, so hopefully it's clear. Okay, there we go. Okay, so this is an article that came out in the Nature Conservancy, Nature Conservancy, called Accepting a Queer Nation. Queer nature, not a queer nation, queer nature. Now, we have talked about queer ecology before. We went into it pretty in depth when we did the paper. Let me let me get the actual title because it was a really great paper. It's in our replay, so you can go back. And it was called, hold on, I'm looking for it. Thinking Feminist, the Vegetal Turn in the Shadow of Douglas Fir. I know it doesn't sound like it, but it actually is very much in tone. Thinking the feminist vegetal turn. That's it. Thinking the feminist vegetal turn in the shadow of Douglas firs. Now, this is an article. It was actually an interview. I did it in 2 parts, and it's really interesting and very connected to this idea of queer nature and of how the queer ecology in general helps us. So, and what is queer ecology and everything. So this article, when it popped up, I thought it was really interesting. It's kind of an article / story. It is connected to how queer ecology can make us better conservationists. Now, I don't often talk about conservation because I feel like our focus many times is on the conservation itself and not the reasons why we're doing the conservation from the perspective of the relationships between plants and humans. So that's the reason why I don't always focus in that direction. But I think that conservationism is extremely important from the perspective of creating a relationship where we're being regenerative and where we're thinking about conservation, not from the perspective of preserving the old, but conservation from the perspective of keeping regenerative relationships going and evolving together. So I think of conservationism not from the perspective of separation and leave you there and I'm not going to touch you, but more of what does joint evolution look like together, because I want to conserve the possibility for us to all continue to evolve in the highest way that we can. And in order for that to happen, we need a lot of diversity and all the other things that we talk about. So it's kind of a different slant on conservationists, but this, I'm very curious as to where queer ecology steps into this. So let's just get into this article and let's see where we go from it. This was written by Susan McHarris, and it was Lands and Lives Intern in Virginia. So it's not a very long paper, and then we'll get into the other one. So not a very long article, but I don't know, I just feel like every once in a while it's nice to have a different focus, and queer ecology is super interesting as what does it bring to the table differently than some of the more direct plant intelligence or plant neurobiology work that we've done, and how does it bring a different relationship with nature that can continuously help us expand and grow our own relationships with nature. So Susan McHarris was the summer 2023 communications intern for the Nature Conservancy. And so that's, who she is and where she comes from and where this, she's also apparently the author of Traveling Through Time in the Virginia Pinelands. And she's a philosophy and environmental studies student at Swarthmore College. So let's get into it and see where we're going. What are the first things you learn when studying conservation ecology is that biodiversity and stability go hand in hand. Whether at the species or ecosystem level, having greater genetic diversity allows organisms to better weather disturbances. And this is what I was talking about, right? The whole idea that the genetic diversity allows everybody to weather disturbances. And then I would go a step further, which is the perspective that I think is really also often lacking from these conversations, that it also helps us in our evolution, because not only do the individuals weather the disturbances better, but everybody weathers the disturbances better because we are evolving together, and therefore we're enhancing our best traits moving through this. So genetic diversity, as well as species diversity, is always that aspect of more mirrors for me to use in order to continue to evolve as best as I can. And as it turns out, the same can be said for humans, of course. Fostering collaboration and interdependence despite differences serve to make us stronger. Exactly. To this end, it's important that we continue to listen to and highlight queer perspectives. Now, although Pride Month is behind us, there seems no better time than the present to remember that Pride started as a riot. In 1970, the first Pride March was organized to force the general public to see LGBTQ+ communities and contend with their struggle for human rights. For those outside the community, the increasing visibility of LGBTQ plus people meant one thing. The nuclear family composed of heterosexual, cisgendered people might not be the only way or the only desirable way to live. And honestly, I have to say, as a person who has always grown up to be very open and, what's the right word I'm going to say? Look, I grew up in a lot of different communities. I mean, I grew up in South Florida. I grew up in Miami. I was able to be exposed to so many different things. I have a mother that was able to have lots of conversations with. And so for me, I have never felt myself to like see the world through one eye, like through one particular lens. I've always had this benefit of seeing through many different lenses. But I have to say that once I started working with plants closely, oh my goodness, that exploded. It made my relationship with plants has allowed me to see even more of the color palette that exists in the world in such a way that it's hard to even imagine that I didn't see things the way I see things today. I mean, there is no like one way. There is no the equivalent of, I mean, yes, there is probably the equivalent of heterosexual when you look at the plant world, but there are so many different exceptions to the rules that there are no rules. Like, and that's the beauty of it. It's more of, let me get to know how this plant, does things. How does this plant, whether we're talking about communication or how the plant has sex or how the plant reproduces, like it's so fascinating to me that yes, there are some big categories, but there's also so much variation within every single category that I think I can understand where queer ecology really came to the surface and what makes this conversation so much easier to have from the perspective of when we're looking in through a natural lens. At its core, this is what queerness has always been about, an expansion of what we consider normal. I've never liked the term normal, just for the record. It's always bothered me because I've always been like, what the hell is normal? The term queer, initially used to describe something odd or strange, has been used as a pejorative for, and more recently reclaimed as an identity by, LGBTQ plus people. Recently, the term has also been increasingly popular within academic spaces, where it signifies a rejection of the dominant paradigms. Basically, it's queer and synonymous to sprouts, right? The rejection of dominant paradigms. Actually, the rejection really of not of dominant paradigms, just a rejection of rigid paradigms. I would say it that way. I mean, it doesn't matter if they're dominant or minority. I don't really care. I mean, what I care about is if it's a rigid paradigm where it's like fixed and closed, it's probably no good because it doesn't have flexibility and it doesn't really represent everyone, and nothing will represent everyone. And that's the whole point. To queer, in this sense, is to insist upon alternatives to traditional ideas of gender and sexuality. For many in environmental spaces, this use of queer inspires a re-imaging of our relationship to the natural world and urges us to take a critical lens to both what we know and how we know what we know. Quote, we risk erasing what can't be standardized. This is exactly what a queer ecological, I'm going to try that again. We risk erasing what can't be standardized. This is exactly what a queer ecological lens can help shield against. If you live in the Western world, your knowledge about the natural world probably comes from popular science. No, if you're here and you're listening to this, your knowledge of the natural world probably comes from collective science. And isn't that awesome? Isn't that awesome? Isn't that? And while the scientific method, when done correctly, does produce replicable claims about the world, it can only be as objective as its practitioners. I wish more people understood this line. This is extremely important. Everything gets filtered through the lens, even what we're talking about right now, even myself. I never claim to be completely objective. Of course, it's being filtered through my thoughts and my imagination and my understandings. Now, I do this live here with you because I want your feedback, because I want your ideas and thoughts and your lens and the way that you see things to come through as well. I don't want this to just be mine. I'm going to tell you what I think, and then I'm going to listen to your feedback and we're going to have dialogue about it. That's the way that we get to the best understanding that we possibly can. And again, going back to the idea of no rigidity, that's the whole point of the queer, is opening it to any possible interpretation, and that the interpretation comes based on what are the experiences of those that are expressing. Not surprisingly, Western science tends to fall into the same pitfalls as the larger culture that informs it. Cultural norms such as patriarchy and heteronormativity, wow, I said that all in one go, impact what gets researched, what conclusions are drawn from what conclusions are drawn from data, and ultimately how we view the natural world. This is where the discipline of queer ecology steps in. Initially coined by environmental humanities scholars Catriona Sandilands, the article that I was talking about that we reviewed was an interview of Catriona Sandilands. So this is why it's a really great precursor or something else to read about exactly what we're talking about here, because it was a very in-depth and fascinating interview that went into what are the queer ecologies, why do they exist, what do they mean, and more importantly, what impact can they possibly have, and how do they help us to really experience, to use the lens of nature in a different way. The term has been embraced by those interested in understanding how cultural norms around gender and sexuality have impacted how we view the natural world. We know that our society likes to see things in terms of binaries: culture versus nature, man versus woman, good versus evil. If only nothing is ever that black and white. And in a way, these binaries are the natural consequences of our pattern-seeking brains. They allow us to easily categorize and interpret the world around us. However, our preference towards simple categories can also cause us to turn away from things that are not easily categorizable. And this has been, honestly, little side note, this has been slight bane of my existence, because I tend to be very much a gray person. Like I've had some friends that have been black or white, actually even past relationships where the person was very black or white, like the world is either this way or it's this way over here. And I just can't get into it. So I'm always like, well, what about all this in between? And they're like, why do you always have to complicate things? I'm like, I'm not complicating it. I'm seeing what the possibilities are in this. But yeah, I think shades of gray are really scary to people, especially if you ask people who are honest, and you can have a really nice open conversation of why some people go into religions. Religions tend to be philosophies tend to be very gray. Like, here are the general kind of aspects, and here you can interpret them and understand them how you want. Religions tend to be very much about black and white, right? You do this and this happens, and this is the way you have to act. And they are two different modes of seeing the world. And I don't think necessarily from a personal perspective of how you want to apply them for yourself, they're not always bad. But I think when you start to apply them to others, when you try to like push that, whether you're talking about grays or black and whites, because honestly, it could go in either way, you then are kind of restricting yourself and you're restricting the others around you. Now, if you want to restrict yourself, I don't care. But if you want to restrict others around you, that's where you run into problems. Our urge to understand nature through binaries has left various ideas and beings either understudied or misunderstood, which can have lasting impacts on our ecological practices. For example, biologist Dr. Patricia Kaishan describes how fungi, beings that exist beyond this is the first, by the way, this is the first article I've ever seen that calls them beings like we do. Like we in NCC tend to call beings, right? Plants beings and different kinds of beings that we interact with. This is the first article I have read in a major publication that uses the term beings, not species, not whatever agents or any of that kind of thing. And I really like it. I like it. Beings that exist beyond the categories of plant or animal have been largely left out of conservation efforts due to their lack of conformity and quantifiable boxes. Fungi are definitely beings that are beyond the categories of plants and animal. But there are so many others, right? Viruses and, well, bacteria, let's not go with viruses. Bacteria, microorganisms, so many others types of beings that exist out there. When ideas fail to conform to our norms, we tend to throw them out entirely. Controlled burns, a forestry method used for thousands of years by indigenous peoples of the Americas, were erased by the settler narrative that North America was a pristine natural wilderness. Fire suppression policies enacted due to belief that fire was unequivocally bad for ecosystems has had the additional effect of excluding indigenous groups from the land stewardship essential to their cultures. Good one. It's a good example. Queer ecology wants to remind us that our understandings of the natural world will never be separated from our understandings of ourselves. This is an awesome line. Queer ecology wants to remind us that our understanding of the natural world will never be separated from our understanding of ourselves. How could it? Because our understandings of the natural world, since we are nature, means it's an understanding of ourselves. I mean, it's sort of inherent, and we should actually recognize that this is an inherent, one is inherent in the other, but I find it interesting that they have to call it out because we have so forgotten. This goes both ways. If we want to live in a society accepting of queer people, we should accept that nature is fundamentally queer too. Yes! When we begin to understand that queerness is integral to nature, we accept the variance of identities within our own society of ourselves. And let me take a step for a second and be very clear. Queer, I think, especially because queer is often connected to, because queer is used by the LGBTQ plus community, there is this sort of, oh man, this is going to be one of those where plant thinking and human thinking are going to clash. So bear with me for a second. Queer is in some aspects inherently a feeling of being. It is not necessarily your direct gender or your direct sexual orientation, right? Queer is way beyond that. Like, I have always considered myself, even before we ever used the term queer, I have always considered myself to be queer. I've always considered myself to be very fluid, both in my, we're getting into TBI, I mean, too much information here, TMI, but just because I think it's important. I have always considered myself to be very, very queer as long as I could possibly remember, even though I have had predominantly heterosexual relationships, and I predominantly consider myself female, and that's what my anatomy is, but there's still a fluidity that's always existed in there in expressions and in feelings. And to me, way before even you ever had the term queer, that to me was queer, right? I've always had this massive fluidity in the way that I express myself in the world with my, my gender as well as with my sexuality. Therefore, I just wanted to be said that queerness, and this is what we're talking about, and this is why I feel like for me, the plant world really helped me see myself more clearly in seeing these expressions that exist, these variances, this, the understanding that queerness is natural, that there is a fluidity and all these different pieces, all those shades of gray in between can be just slight variations in certain areas. It's not like you have to be at any, because we tend to then think of queer as like, well, you have to be, I don't know, a lesbian, or you have to be transgendered, or you have to be this type of thing. No, right? It doesn't have to be the extremes of that either. There is a grayness, there is a fluidity in there. And the natural world helps us see this better, especially when we recognize that we ourselves are nature, that we have a fluidity within ourselves that we can express in whatever way works best for us. So this is where I think that this line of when we begin to understand that queerness is integral to nature, we accept the variances of identities within our own society and selves. We understand this variance, the variety and the expressions that can come in different ways. So just as a point, because I feel like sometimes when we get into these conversations, it's very easy to think that you also have to be an extreme. In order to be queer, you have to be at the extreme of the queer labels. And that's just more categorization that doesn't really work. And it just ends up being detrimental to the entire discussion. For many Indigenous and non-Western societies, gender variance has long been accepted and celebrated, but the US continues to remain a hostile environment for gender non-conforming folks. Opponents for LGBTQ plus issues frequently state that being queer isn't natural. Yeah, right. Yet, homosexuality evidently is natural. Over 1,500 animal species have been observed performing same-sex sexual behavior, while scientists are unsure of how homosexuality evolved in humans. What? How? I hate this. Like, how? How? Just because, not a how, just because. There are many theories about its advantages for survival, especially for social species. While gender identity is uniquely human phenomenon, various animal species exhibit forms of non-binary sex. For example, many species of fish are sequential hermaphrodites, meaning that they begin as one sex but switch to the other later in life. Intersex conditions, in which an individual possesses both male and female traits, appear across the phylum Animalia. And in plants, this number explodes. So true. Although we tend to attribute femininity to flowers, about 90% of flowering plants produce bisexual flowers with both male and female reproductive organs. This is awesome. I mean, I think that this whole paragraph is extremely educational. And I love that it exists from this perspective of like being so clear, because again, we are attributing sort of exhibiting characteristics to biology. And this is a great example that this doesn't help neither us as humans, but because it doesn't, the whole natural world, it doesn't help anybody. Like it, anyway, sorry, I get excited. I'm very excited about this. The reality is that neither humans nor nature fit neatly into binary categories. Okay, I hate this sentence. See, I was in love with all these sentences. Now I hate this. Neither humans nor nature. Humans are nature. It would be better said that the reality is that nature is a nature of which humans are a part, does not fit neatly into binary categories. I think that would be a better sentence. Don't you think? Right? It would be a better sentence, wouldn't it? Realizing this, we see that the strength of modern science can also be its weakness. While reducing information into standardized bits of data is important to digest big ideas, if that is the only way we understand the world, we risk erasing what we can't standardize, what can't be standardized. This is exactly what a queer ecological lens can help shield us against. Sorry, I'm rereading something because I want to. We see that the strength of modern science can also be its weakness. While reducing information into standardized bits of data is important to digest big ideas, yes, if that is the only way we understand the world, we risk erasing what can't be standardized. Okay, fair enough, fair. As those interested in nature and its protection, we should take issue with homophobia and transphobia seriously. Not just because they impact our queer friends and family members, although that should be reason enough, but also because these biases impact our relationship with the natural more than human world. And there is no better time than the present to open to ideas that may seem counterintuitive or that resist the norm. With environmental crisis looming on the horizon, it is evident that many of our traditional ways of interacting with the natural world are unsustainable. Effective solutions may only come from unexpected places, including our blind spots. Sorry, I feel like, and maybe this is just me, but I feel like this premise that I really did like this article. I like this article because I think it's in the Nature Conservancy. It's in a fairly conservative in some ways publication. I feel like it's going to have a broad reach. I feel like at the very end, sorry, I feel like at the very end, it separates more than it unites. And I feel like this is a shame that the way that this article was written. I feel like this ending needs to be rewritten. If I was an editor, I would have them rewrite this ending. First of all, because here you are talking about the fact that queer ecology helps us better understand ourselves, right? The fact that, like this paragraph, which I think is great over here, that we're talking about, you know, these two paragraphs around over 1,500 animal species have been observed performing sexual behavior while scientists are unsure. Even this whole sentence of while scientists are unsure of how homosexuality involved in humans, who cares how? I mean, if we start to talk about how homosexuality, if we propose is not the right word, if we encourage science to continue to try to dissect homosexuality as to how it happened, isn't that the same thing we're asking them to do to humans? Like, rather than just accepting that this is a state of being and that the person is whatever the person decides to be in that moment that they decide to be it, We are instead saying that there should be a how, because it must have come from survival needs, social ramifications. Like I have read recently, even, I wish I still had it with me right now, I don't have it accessible, an article that was talking about sexual behavior in certain types of, I don't remember if it was of birds or if it was some kind of, it wasn't a, it might have been a mammal, but anyways, the specific species they were talking about how the about homosexuality, but they were talking about it purely in the perspective of, oh, this evolved in order to create these types of relationships, of friendships and whatever. And I think if we keep going down and we keep encouraging this, then we're just moving in the exact same, it's counterintuitive to the entire discussion, right? The entire discussion that we're trying to have, which is that homosexuality or whatever, any kind of queerness is a state of being and is natural, and therefore there should be a flow. The same thing with this last paragraph, with this other paragraph that I feel is really great. While gender identity is uniquely human, as far as we know, right, we actually have no clue, I think, of really what gender looks like from the perspective of either plants or any other kind of animal that doesn't speak. Like, we don't really know this relating to gender. I think we struggle with trying to recognize what would gender visually look like to us when a being can't speak of what exactly they're feeling. So, but that's fine. Let's leave that for now as something that's understand. But it says various animal species exhibit forms of non-binary sex. And there's a lot of hermaphrodites. There's all these other things. I think that this paragraph here is great because it starts to say, I would have taken out, whatever, fine with the human phenomenon, but it starts to say, look, there's all these other expressions of, it's not really exactly gender, but of sexual and of physiology that exist in the world, things that we as humans don't really understand. Like, if plants switch later in life is our current methodology of being transsexual, is that similar, right? We as humans have evolved this technology to help us do it, where, fish are able to do it from a physiological perspective. It's good. These are all questions that are interesting. Then you get to this last piece and you start to separate out humans, right? You say the reality is that neither humans nor nature. Humans are nature. So this already starts to separate us into binary categories. You say that we don't fit nearly into binary categories, but you put me into a binary category immediately. And then, you say all of this other part where you're like, okay, queer ecological lens can help shield us against the idea of trying to erase what can't be standardized. Great. And so it says those interested in nature and its protection should take issue with issues of homophobia and transphobia seriously, not just because they impact queer, but because these bias impact our relationship with the natural more than human world. Natural world includes humans. More than human, fine. But am I just overreacting? Or it's interesting because the last line is effective solutions may come from unexpected places, including our blind spots. And I feel like the author has a series of blind spots that kind of don't. I know I'm nitpicking. I know I am nitpicking. I understand this, but I nitpick on purpose because I feel like these are really important nitpickies to do. I know it's going to take steps, little tiny steps. And that's the reason why I wanted to bring this article to you, because again, this is an article that's coming out of the Nature Conservancy. So I feel like, okay, these are little teeny tiny steps. We're taking steps to make certain conversations easier to have. So yes, this is from the perspective of queer ecology. Yes, this is this perspective of standardizing a whole series of things. But the first thing you need to standardize is the remembrance that we are nature, and stop separating humans out. You're trying to use the rest of the natural world, right? All of the other beings that are inside of the natural world to help understand how we should look at humans differently. But then the best way to do this would be to recognize that all humans are a part of nature. And if you were to do that, then it would make your argument so much easier. I think that by separating out this argument, you're just really hurting yourself. So yeah, that's my yes. I know I nitpick on all of these things, but that's my job, right? I'm here to push this envelope. I want us to push this envelope. I want us to go into these kinds of articles and read them and be happy that they exist, because I am happy that they exist. And go and look at the author and be like, this is awesome. Thank you so much for doing this. And here are some places where you can do better next time. Keep pushing the envelope. Keep changing the paradigm. Keep moving everything forward. Okay, given the time, I am not going to get into this next paper because the next thing I have is a 20-pager. I'm going to show it to you, but I'm not going to get into it. We're going to get into it next week. So we're actually going to close up a little bit early. I mean, it is a holiday weekend anyway for people in the US, which would be me right now because I'm actually in the US. But I want to share this one with you so that you can see what we're going to be talking about. And I'll put it in for next week. Okay, I'm going to put it in for next week so that you can see it. Uh-oh, how do I do this? Hold on. Again, I'm in a mobile setup, so it's going to take me a minute. Come on, mister, come out here. Okay, this is the way. Okay, so I'm going to show you what we're going to be talking about next week. Thanks, Lori. Yeah, I really do feel like I really do think that we're going on the right realm, like we're in the right direction. And I'm glad that she did write this article. And if you go back again, if you haven't seen the one of the vegetal furs, listen to me. The vegetal furs. No, that's not what I meant to say. The Thinking the Feminist Vegetal Turn is really awesome to go and express. And this one, Lori, I think you're going to enjoy this since you're here. This is a piece that came out in 2018 in Environmental Philosophy, and it's called Poetry, Vegetality, and Relief from Being. So this is an interesting poetry, vegetality. Vegetality is synonymous to plantness, by the way. So Poetry, Plantness, and Relief from Being by Mark Payne. I, again, have not read it, the whole thing. I have to admit, I have read the abstract. And I'm really looking forward to, this is where we're going to get into next week. I feel like this is a really awesome kind of direction for us to take because I want us to continue to explore. I'm going to be mixing in always a little bit of biology, a little bit of arts, a little bit of social commentary, a little bit of plant humanities. We're going to do it. So yeah, Laurie says, cool, I'd welcome some relief from being at this moment. Too much. I understand, too much food. I still have a little bit leftovers. I'm super excited to eat them, but yeah, I get it. So we're going to get into that paper right away. So we're going to jump into it next week in order to get through the whole thing because it is 20 pages long. I'm actually excited. This is something I read about a while ago. Like I found this paper. I have to go through my list again, and my list of papers is getting so good because as we're moving into 2019, 2018, 2019, and then going on, the papers just become much more complex. The discussions become much richer. There's much more opening for different things. So I'm going to save that all until next week so that we have time and so that we have the ability to really go into it. There is so much good stuff happening in the naturally conscious community. So please, I hope that you will come and join us there. We have a creative greenhouse coming up where we're going to talk about the idea of creating what would a naturally conscious community book look like. We have the writing group, which continues to expand, and our writing time to be able to take that time to really give yourself permission to write. We have more live commentary, some really good podcast episodes. So anyways, there's just so much going on. So please join us in the Naturally Conscious community. And remember, if you have not yet claimed your Green Friday gift, your Green Friday gift is a plant music healing session with myself and Spider Plants, and you're going to love it. So we're going to close this off a little early. We're going to give you some extra time to enjoy with your family and friends. Please, again, wherever you are, enjoy this week of gratitude and hopefully some really good food. And we'll see each other next week. All right. Bye.